In the Bible, Paul explains that everyone has two bodies, a physical body and a spiritual body. Mediums use their spiritual bodies when they act as a communication bridge between the physical and spirit worlds. As a spirit speaks, mediums hear the information using the ears of their spiritual bodies, then repeat the information to other physical people. Mediumship is synonymous with the biblical term gifts of the Spirit. The focus of our show, Making Known the Unknown, is to provide knowledge through the use of Reverend Hewitt's mediumship and Sidney Schwartz's research. The Bible contains the history of psychic events, along with man-made doctrines created by priests centuries ago. This show will explore the untruths which the Bible entrenched into our society. By uncovering these untruths, we encourage people everywhere to think for themselves with a critical mind.
Hello, and welcome to Making Known the Unknown. I'm your host, Tina Tarryk, and with me today is Sidney Schwartz, middle school teacher from Hackensack, New Jersey, and Bible researcher of 25 plus years. Welcome, Sidney.
Hi, Tina.
And Reverend Carl Hewitt, founder and pastor of Gifts of the Spirit Church in Chesterfield, Connecticut, and medium. Welcome, Carl.
Thank you. I'm honored to be with you.
Oh, thank you. And thank you, viewers, for taking the time to tune in and open your minds. It's as simple as that. The topic of today's show is murder of a medium. And are we going to have fun? Can anybody guess? I feel like a teacher. Can anybody guess what that's going to refer to? Murder of a medium. Let's see. A few days ago, a movie came out that's titled The Passion. I'm sure everybody by now knows about it, whether they wanted to or not. And what we're going to do, we're not here to promote the movie. We're not here to help somebody make money off of the media. We're here to talk about the content of the movie. Now, in reality, none of the three of us have seen this movie. But we know enough about the content of the movie, which has to do with the Gospels, that we feel confident that we can produce this show and share with some of our viewers the truth and the deception that has gone on with the crucifixion and the Gospels and so on and so forth. And the two gentlemen that I have here on the set together make a very powerful research team that I don't think you're going to find anywhere else in the world. Okay, so with that, I wanted to begin by bringing out a couple of the pieces of, again, what this movie depicted, and that it was based on the interpretation of the Gospels. And of course, our Bible expert, and I mean expert, I don't think you'll find any minister, priest, or anyone of the clergy that knows more about the Bible than this man.
No one. No one.
So I turned to him.
To him, not me.
I am pointing to Sidney. And so I will throw this question out to you with respect to the interpretation of the Gospels. What do you think the intent of the Gospel was, the Gospels, who wrote them, so on and so forth? I'll just let you go from there.
Well, from what I understand of the movie, the movie was written using the Gospels as the main script. And so therefore the movie is very accurate with the Gospels. However, one has to realize that the Gospels were written, the first one was written about 30 years after Jesus' death, and I think the last one was written maybe about 100 years after the death. So even though it's not necessarily an eyewitness account, or if it was, it's an eyewitness account after a lot of time has gone by. And for some people, sometimes people remember things a little bit differently than it happens. And this is why there's inconsistencies between the four Gospels. Even on the crucifixion story, one will mention something, and while the others don't. For example, one of the more controversial lines in the movie has to deal was in the book of Matthew in chapter 27, where it says that the Jews said, "Crucify him and let his blood be upon us and upon our children." Well, that only appears in Matthew, and it doesn't appear in the other Gospels. So a lot of what Mr. Gibson had to do with was decide which one of these Gospel things to use, and that has to do with his own personal choice and his own personal beliefs. And he did choose to portray that line, although there was so much flack about the movie being anti-Semitic that he chose not to translate it from the Aramaic and put it on the screen. So therefore, it's said in Aramaic, but it's not read in English. But it does appear in the movie. So a lot of the Jewish community's concern about the movie has to deal with the fact that the story of the crucifixion has been used for 2,000 years to justify going into the Jewish community and killing Jews and burning down their houses and things like that. Mm. That's happened frequently right into I know in the 1930s and 40s it was happening in Europe still. So for the Jewish people, the Lenten period has always been a time of a bit of tension because of this. The other thing that I've been hearing a lot about is the fact that historically, the movie isn't accurate historically because the Gospels aren't accurate historically. That certain things were happening, such as with Pontius Pilate. The movie, from what I understand, portrays him as being a little bit doubtful whether or not he should crucify Jesus, or trying to be a little bit lenient, where historical accounts of him make him quite ruthless and very bloodthirsty, and he was very cruel to all the people all the time. And the movie has quite a sympathetic view of Pilate, as opposed to what history has shown us. I've been listening to a lot of different critics and rabbis and clergy talking about the movie, getting a lot of these different points of view. So what you are seeing is Mel Gibson's interpretation of what the Bible says, because as we said before, even the Bibles, there's 300 different Bibles that are in existence, and they will be worded quite differently from here and there, and as far as the words that they use and sometimes the concepts that they even say. So they chose to use the New Living Bible version to put on the screen, which is a good version to use because it's linguistically easy to understand. While its predecessor, the Living Bible, had tons of mistranslations in it and misunderstandings in it and mistaken information in it. They corrected it in the revised version, so that is a good version for it to appear on the screen because it's easy to understand. But even so, there's still a lot of controversy of what certain things mean.
Now, I've been curious if, in actuality, the Stations of the Cross was something that Jesus himself went through that really didn't have the symbolism then that they have now turned it into now. Can you share anything with us about that, Carl?
It was when he was exhausted, dragging that very heavy cross on his back, and he was exhausted. And he would pause to get his breath there, and every time they do, they would beat him.
Oh, so they make a big deal out of that.
14 times he stopped.
To get beaten or whatever.
To rest a little bit, and they were beating him till he was bleeding like a stuck pig.
And now they turned that into an institution.
Yes.
Yeah.
The thing that I really don't understand, and again, I'm coming from a Jewish point of view, so there's things about Catholicism I don't understand. But the Stations of the Cross include a woman, Veronica, coming up to Jesus and taking a cloth, wiping his face, and his image was on the cloth.
Oh, right.
That story does not exist in the Bible at all. It's not in the Gospels at all. So how this became part of the Stations of the Cross while it's outside of the Bible, I don't understand.
Okay. This is what you're referring to as Veronica's veil,
yes,
right? And
exactly.
We had talked about it in other shows.
Yes.
Isn't it also, is it in the Smithsonian Institute?
I don't think that cloth exists per se. There's pictures, there's an artist's conception of it.
Okay, that's what you're talking about.
In the Smithsonian.
Okay.
Okay, and there's pictures of it, but the actual one, I don't believe exists.
Right,
and
it
might be precipitated art similar to the precipitated art we've talked about.
Okay.
But it's my question is, why isn't that in the Bible story? You would think if it's that important to be in the Stations of the Cross, why isn't it in the Bible?
Well, it's a woman.
No, that
And
could be
right
part
there,
of
that
it.
automatically should tell you something that it's not going to be included.
Well,
Of what value is it to the church to have that knowledge there? Will it help them control people based on fear? Probably not.
You have a good point.
So it's sort of useless. They're telling the story, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
Okay. I got into a little bit about an interview that Mel Gibson had with Diane Sawyer on Primetime, MSN Primetime, I guess it's referred to, and, excuse me, ABC Primetime. And his real belief that pain is the precursor to change, and how he really does buy into the fact that this, it would appear that Jesus was beaten for our iniquities. This is a direct quote, and he was wounded for our transgressions, and by his wounds we are healed. Does that make any sense to you, Carl?
No. Would you permit me to tell you who really had him killed?
Go, please, please.
Let me go back a little ways. Let me go back to just before he was born. He and Moses and Elijah were in the other dimension, the very highest that there are out there, highest dimension. And they were watching what was going on the planet, and there was priests all over the place, and each priest had a group of people, you know, and they had different gods. This group over here was worshiping some god, and this one over here, God. They were all being misled. Whereas he felt sorry for these people. He really did. But he tried to figure out some way of coming back here, but not as a ghost, not as an apparition, but coming back here as a physical being. And so he had already learned how to do that. And so what he did is he lowered himself down 7 levels of frequency, and he entered through the solar plexus of this young woman who had just come into her first season of blood. She had just passed her 13th birthday. And he came into the world as a human being. It really was an immaculate conception. But this is how he did it. It was not through copulation. And so he came into the world endowed with the gifts of the Spirit. He knew that God was within him, and he knew that God was within everybody on the planet. Everybody. It doesn't matter who they were. This is where God was. And so as he was growing up, his grandmother understood him. She knew that he was very gifted. This was Mary's mother. And even as a little boy, he was teaching his parents things and everything else. And then when he got to teaching, the very people that used to support the priest, they started hearing about his teaching was altogether different than what they'd been taught. And so they were leaving the priest and following him. And he didn't go about to do this. He just wanted the truth to be known to everybody. And then all of a sudden, the priests noticed that they've got competition. The people are not bringing them food. They're not bringing them money. They're not giving them a shelter. And there was a chance that these priests had to go out and get a job. God help them. And so what they did, they ganged up and talked to each other for the first time. And it was the priest that killed him. No one else. It was the priest. But at that time, the way I look at it, I take those priests, I take them out from under the umbrella of Jews. To me, they were not a Jew, because I've never had a problem with any of the Jewish people, except him. And, so I could never see that. And so I questioned so many times. I've questioned everything you could think about, and I've got all my answers. It was the priest that killed him. Okay. It killed him.
So the priests that were there at that time, were they of many different denominations that came together?
They were crazy denominations.
Okay.
Like I said, each one of them had a different god.
Okay.
So there was all, over here it was all garbage, that was garbage. They made it up themselves. They made it up themselves.
I mean, if you think about it, a man has come into the world, and he came into the world, and he was a man, was he not?
Yes, he was.
And
6'2".
Oh,
with auburn hair,
right.
blue-green eyes, very handsome man. And they said that the hair on the back of his hands looked like gold. It would shine.
Really?
And he had a beautiful tan because he was always outside, and he did all of his teaching in the dark because he knew. Because Moses and Elijah, in spirit, kept telling him, the priests are after you, got to be careful. And they would tell him to go to this place, whereas he had planned on going over there. And they finally caught up with him, and you know the rest of the story. It was a horrible death.
Maybe at some point later in this show, we'll be lucky enough to have a camera focus on this picture behind us
Yes.
that shows Jesus as a very real man.
Very real.
With a wife and children.
Yeah.
And his children weren't born of immaculate conception.
The church hid all of this. They didn't want people to know that he was married, didn't want them to know that he had 2 children,
Right.
Sarah and James.
Okay. All right.
It
Maybe-
shocked me a little bit at first when they first told me about it.
Right.
And then after they told me about it, I got used to it and started to think, well, why not? Why not?
Absolutely.
He selected these
Oh,
men.
there's a picture there.
He selected
Thank
these
you.
young men because he could see the light around them, and he knew
Right.
they had the potential of becoming an instrument of the Spirit themselves. And out of the 12, only 3, Peter, James, and John.
Now, if we look at this picture, of course, the story behind this picture is very interesting, too, because
Yes.
this was painted by a former nun.
Yes?
And former, it's very important to know that she's former for a
Yeah.
reason.
Yeah.
And that this is a family. This is a real family.
Yes.
This is not a God with a wife and 2 children. This is a man with a wife and a family. And most people don't want to believe that. They've kept him separate as the Son of God. Am I correct with that? And they went so far as to call Mary, his wife, a prostitute.
That's right.
Does she look like a prostitute to
No,
you?
no.
I don't think so. Of course, the artist can depict people any way they want. I realize that.
Absolutely.
But
I had a conversation with a group of people, and
Thank you.
And they were talking about the Da Vinci Code and the fact that Jesus was married and he had a wife. And one of the women became almost utterly distraught because she couldn't reconcile the fact that he was a man and had a wife, because she thought he was a god and had no sin. So she really was having a very difficult time handling it.
very interesting.
Yeah.
He was a god, but in human form, right? Is that what that is?
Yes, yes,
That's
right.
what that's about.
Excuse me, I want to ask him where it is in the Bible because I can't remember all that stuff. Where is it in the Bible where Jesus said that, find the kingdom of God, look within yourself?
That's Luke 21:17.
Luke 21:17.
Okay.
For the people out there, Luke 21:17. Jesus tried to teach everybody that God is within. That's what I'm teaching. This is what I've accepted. I do not pray to something out there, nothing out there, but cold air. I pray to the Lord God of my being, and this is what I would suggest that people do.
Now, it wasn't as difficult for me to hear that you just said priests were responsible for killing Jesus. But I am sure, for those of you who will watch this show, actually, for those of you who have the courage to watch this show, where did this information come from? It might be more upsetting to those people out there.
It did not come from anybody on the planet, did not come from a book or a movie or anything. I have the gift of clairaudient. At times I hear voices as clear as you're hearing my voice right now, but my voice is being amplified by the electronic system in this studio. But you get a person that has the gift of clairaudient, they hear voices. And to go in the Bible, you read all through the Bible, and the voice of the Lord came to me. Well, in those days, somebody that would speak to, let's say Sid was back there in those days, and he heard a voice. Well, they would say that the Lord spoke to him. They used to use the word Lord out of respect for the person they could not see. And so all the way through the Bible, there's all this writing about the people hearing voices. My question to the viewers of this program, if the spirit world, the people in the spirit world spoke to all of these people all the way through that book, why don't they speak to us today? They do. But mediums have been put down, they've been burned at the stake, they've been butchered, they've been killed, they've been hung on the cross. He was a great medium. He was a wonderful medium. And that's what he tried to teach his 12 students in the upper room. It was a seance every single night. And when you have the chance of sitting in the presence of a genuine medium, the genuine medium is almost like the queen bee in a beehive. The spirit people come and communicate with that person. And at some time, if the person is genuine, that is the student, they could learn to go into that altered state of consciousness and have the spirit body take over.
Okay.
That's what happens.
It's just so interesting that this switch happened. Let's just say that you don't buy and people don't want to believe the idea, or the truth, I should say, that the priests were responsible for Jesus dying. he came in, being killed, not dying. I have to put that in that context, because he was killed. He was actually murdered.
Yes.
If this man came into this world and he did nothing but good,
That's all he did.
it makes no sense whatsoever, if you can think for yourself, that he went from that to being murdered. I mean, just think about that. Any child could reason that out and try to figure out that that makes no sense. What's going on?
The other thing that I wanted to know from Spirit is, you notice Judas here on this picture is kissing him on the cheek.
Yeah.
They told me that Judas was equivalent to, and they used an example that I happen to know about right here in this part of the state. There's an employee working for a particular place, but he's what we would call slow on the draw, or a little simple. But he's a good person, a very good person. He'll do anything for you. If you speak to him, he'll speak to you. He'll do anything. He's a good kid. And in that time, he could not visualize anybody hurting this man that's done nothing but good to everybody.
Right.
He just could not visualize this. And so when all of those soldiers, they went to every one of his students, and when they finally came to him, they call him some name equivalent to, hey, stupid. Why don't you point him out? Because nobody else would point him out. Nobody. And he says, well, rather than point him out, I'll go kiss him on the cheek, and that's the one you're looking for. But he didn't know that they were going to harm him. And when he saw, and the other students came over and says, you know what you did? They're going to kill him. They're going to torture him. They're going to kill him. The kid, he didn't understand that. He just could not believe anybody would do that. And so when he saw that they were really beating him, you know, and he was bleeding and everything else, he went and got a rope and hung himself. And the devil had nothing to do with it, and that book always said the devil took him over. They couldn't live without the devil, these organizations.
You'd think that if Judas was really behind this and had something to gain from this, as in maybe monetary gain, that he wouldn't have had a tragic ending like that. That he would have gone off and been very successful and had all the food and the clothing and everything that he could need.
Now he realized there that it was his fault that they caught him, and but the poor kid didn't know enough. He was only 16.
Really?
He didn't know enough, you know, like the rest of them, to protect him.
Now, I found it interesting in this interview, too, when you talk about evil and you talk about Satan, that the people who were there witnessing this, and the people who were participating in this crucifixion, this torture, this murder, were almost elevated, well, they were elevated, I guess, to a noble level in history, if you'll follow my line of thinking here. You don't ever see or hear that any one of the people who committed this atrocity were ever jailed, went on trial.
Oh.
And where I'm going with this is, what about the Holocaust? What about the people who murdered Jewish people? What about them? Why in history were people treated differently in very similar situation?
That goes right back to the church. The church teaches people that, well, I came from the South, as you know, and I was taught that the black people out there are the people of the devil, and God, we follow the real God, the white people. And so this has caused all of this problem between the blacks and the whites in the South. It came from the church.
Okay.
Over there, they were teaching and preaching that the Jews, Jesus would still be living today and stopping in for coffee and all of this business with all the people, but it was the Jews that destroyed him, that killed him. You see what I mean? So they built up this hatred, and then when they had the opportunity, they took advantage of him, and then they started killing the Jews.
Unless I'm missing something here, though, the whole portrayal of the crucifixion has nothing to do with anybody being responsible for their actions or for participating in this, just like, well, not unlike, I should say, during the times of the Holocaust, when they were seeking out Hitler and his gang to have them face what they did.
Jesus, when he came into the world, he did to the rest of the priests like Walmart's is doing to the little merchant. You understand what I mean? It is too much money and putting them out of business. Well, Jesus was putting them out of business. That's all it was.
See, there's a lot of inconsistencies within the whole story. If you read about Jesus entering Jerusalem, and I believe on Palm Sunday, there were throngs of people there coming in, praising him, singing his praises, saying Hosanna in the highest, and everything else. He had a lot of support going into the city. And throughout that week, it keeps saying that the priests wanted to get a hold of Jesus. They wanted to arrest him, but they were afraid to because the people considered him a prophet, and they were going to protect him. So here you had all the support, and all of a sudden, a few days later, they turn into the exact opposite. So what would cause it to go from one extreme to the other? And this inconsistency, nobody really looks at. The people that were supporting him were Jewish people.
Right.
He was speaking Aramaic.
Right.
He was preaching to the Jews. There were no Christians in those days. So it was the same. It's the same group of people, which kind of leads one to believe that there's some sort of inconsistency in the story here that's not historically correct.
Right.
Okay, that they altered the Bible in order to put in some sort of a storyline that didn't quite jive.
Right.
And
another device of control. Perhaps?
Well, in a sense, but they wanted it to fit their theology. The one thing that I will say that I feel positive about this is that I've been hearing on the radio from many different Christian groups, including Franklin Graham, who's Billy Graham's son, talking about the fact that this really isn't depicting anti-Semitism, but they keep saying that that every person alive, even today, was the one to put Jesus on the cross because Jesus died for their sins. In the Bible, there's a verse in the first book of John, chapter 3, verse 5, and it says, "But you know that Christ came to take away our sins, and there is no sin in him." So they believe that Jesus was a totally pure soul, and that he came to the world to die for people's sins because God needed the sacrifice. There's a lot of inconsistencies with that whole theology. If you go back into the Old Testament, okay, you read about Abraham in the book of Genesis, and he hears a voice from God, and the voice says, "Take your only son Isaac and take him to Mount Horeb, and there you will sacrifice him to me." Okay, and Abraham, showing his loyalty to God, started to do that. He took his son, he tied him up, put him on the altar, was about ready to take a knife to slaughter him when an angel stops it and says, "No, we don't want to do this. We just wanted to see if you're going to follow our instructions." It was a test.
Okay.
Okay. Then later on in the Bible, it says in the Old Testament that God said that parents shouldn't sacrifice their children to the god Moloch, which was another god. It was just apparently they would put them in a fire and burn them. So God didn't want that. So if God didn't want Abraham to kill his son, and he didn't want the children to killed by Moloch, then why would he have Jesus, supposedly his only son, be a blood sacrifice to him? Right. It makes absolutely no sense. No, there's no logic to it at all. But they lose that whole dying for your sin theology if this goes away. I have another thing to mention here with the same verse, and I'll read it one more time. "But you know that Christ came to take away our sins, and there is no sin in him." Well, it depends what you read and whether that Jesus had no sins. Anyone can go on the internet onto Amazon.com and find a book called The Lost Books of the Bible. In that particular book, there are some books that didn't make it into the Bible. They were thrown out. Some of them because of the theology of what they said. In there are two books called the Infancy Gospels. And they talk about Jesus' life as a little boy.
Really?
Yeah. And as Reverend Hewitt said, Jesus was born with the gifts of the Spirit.
Absolutely.
He could do all sorts of things. So one day Jesus was out playing with someone, and he got a little bit angry at him. I'll use the polite word. And he just went and killed him.
Yes, he did. He was about 6 years old then.
Now, if you read the Bible real closely, in the Ten Commandments it says, "Thou shalt not kill."
Of course.
And that certainly would be a big sin.
Yeah.
And the parents of this kid came around and said, "You better control this kid of yours." I say he's gifted and stuff, but he's doing all sorts of stuff he shouldn't do. So obviously he committed a sin. Now, obviously, the infancy gospel didn't make it into the Bible because he can't have any sin, because if he had sin, he couldn't take away your sin.
Right.
See, that whole idea that if he had a blemish
Right.
and anything against his record, he couldn't take away the sins of humanity.
Well, isn't that another reason why they don't want to consider him a man who was married to somebody and had children?
Of course.
Yes.
And did he actually get married in the way we would know, a marriage ceremony?
At
to
that
Mary
time, from what
Magdalene?
they told me, the agreement was between the man and the woman. The agreement became the marriage. They
Really?
didn't have to have a bunch of papers.
Like a civil union of
Yes,
sorts?
yes.
Oh, boy, we won't touch on
Yes.
that one. That's a hot topic
This is
these
where
days,
that old
isn't it?
saying goes. Once in a while you hear about it, the man says, "That's my woman." Goes all the way back to that.
Well, let me say this. If his marriage wasn't recognized by the church, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, that opens up a lot for possibility of sin, doesn't it?
I suppose it does.
But the way I look at it, so much of this stuff has been preached to the people, because the people think that this person who is the preacher, knows it all. I went to Morocco a few years ago to check on some things over there, because I really wanted to know. And they found out that I was a medium, and they weren't too sure that medium in English meant prophet. And so the second time I went over there, I was embarrassed with all the people that met me at the airport there, and all of this business. And I wanted to put a bag over my head. Everybody was wondering who was the famous person in the plane. It turned out to be you-know-who. But these people look up to the prophet as if it's God Almighty.
Right.
I was never so embarrassed in my life. These people bow down to me, all this noise. And
But they understood mediumship because their
Right.
God
respected
was
it.
revealed through a prophet, Muhammad, and they understand about the term
Right.
prophet.
there's one thing I'd like to share with the people, if you want me to.
Please.
You're the you're the director. You're the boss. And that is Ash Wednesday, which just went by.
Yeah.
Would you mind?
Oh, please do.
Okay, if we go back far enough, when people would go to the medium, that was the prophet in those days, and the people would protect them. They would never tell anybody else where he lives or where she lives. And so when the church started burning those mediums at the stake because they were a threat to the priesthood, the people always thought that the medium had a third eye, They would see with this eye here.
Right.
And they were so ignorant that they really thought that this person had a third eye that had eyelashes, like this, really. And so when they started burning them at the stake, the people, their followers, would go in the middle of the night when there's nothing but ashes there, and right at where the stake was, there's some live coals, but on the outer edge of the ashes, they would wet their finger and touch the ashes and put it on their forehead, hoping that will open up their third eye,
Right.
and they could see things too.
Through
you see?
osmosis.
And so this went along for a long, long time, and then there was people there that would wait about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and then there would be no hot coals there,
Yeah.
and they'd go in the middle where all this fat, oil, grease, whatever from the body has
Right.
mixed in with the ashes,
Yeah.
and instead of taking a dab and put it there, they'd put it on their hands like this and their face. That's how they discovered soap.
Are you
And
kidding?
soap was first developed and created in Germany.
Really?
It's a big business, and that's today. And I'm sure that somebody here in this program will have heard the old saying that cleanliness is next to godliness.
Oh, boy.
Because that person that was gifted was considered a god. And if you keep yourself clean, it's next to godliness. This is where that came in.
Oh, boy. So how is it that we now have the interpretation of Ash Wednesday to be so different from what it was?
Okay, it was borrowed because at that time, the person was burned at the stake on Tuesday at 10 o'clock in the morning, and this is why they would go at nighttime. And then people would see them at the marketplace Wednesday morning, and they had this look like a daub of dirt on their forehead, which
Yeah.
was nothing but ashes.
Right.
And this is why they call it Ash Wednesday. It was borrowed from those people, which were really pagans, I guess. They borrowed so many things from all these religions, and they put them together, you know, like a bowl of soup with everything in it. That's
So-
where that came from.
So, but it doesn't explain how the origins of Ash Wednesday have now turned into what they have. Sidney, do you have any insight on that?
Well, they wanted to institute, because Christianity often adopted pagan customs and pagan religions.
Okay.
So therefore, they saw the people doing this on a continual basis. So they just absorbed it, and they made it as part of their own rituals that they would do, because the people were doing it anyhow. They always tried to mimic what the pagans wanted to do, because they wanted the pagans to come to the Christian church and contribute their money to them.
But the pagans also did this because could have been one of their own that was burned at the stake.
Yes. In the Bible, there's a spot, I was trying to find it, but I'm not being too successful, where these people are walking along, and they feel that one of them wasn't feeling too well. And they were looking for the bones of Elisha. And they threw themselves on the bones of Elisha, and they got healed. So that this concept of that the prophet would have so much energy in them, and
Right,
healing energy
right,
in them,
right.
that if they could get their physical body to contact them,
Yeah.
that they'd be healed. Just as in the New Testament, it talks about this woman who touched the hem of Jesus, and Jesus said, "I feel my virtue leaving," which was really my power leaving me, and she was healed because of her belief, as it says. But it's the same concept that's being
Right.
played out throughout history.
How could anybody be healed by a tradition of ashes that represented people being killed? How could that have gotten twisted into being healed in something holy? I don't get it. I don't get it.
Listen, a person with the gifts of the Spirit, such as Jesus, at the time, he was using his God brain, which is back here, and the soul being here, and he put his focus on something, like the time that he changed the molecules of the water into wine. He was able to do that, and that's the first time he ever did that with water. But he had such a powerful mind there that he did it. And if you take a person today, I've seen it, it's happened to me, and I'm not bragging when I say this, but I have seen miraculous things happen. It wasn't me that did it, it was the spirit people in the other dimension using my body as the
Right.
instrument.
Right.
Who was all invisible, and therefore the people who couldn't see all the spirit people manipulating all this
Right.
think that it's a medium, and that it's the medium's body, and
Right.
therefore all this superstition gets created and
Right.
compounded, because everything, the real stuff's all invisible.
Right. Because they have no knowledge, no base of knowledge
To
to pull
understand it.
from to
That's right.
understand that.
Right.
So it's a big leap.
Recently, they told me that I would be in front of a large audience this year that we're in now, and that I am to take 2 cameras and put on the podium, one here, one here. And I would say, I'm going to need a couple of volunteers from the audience. Don't leave your seat yet, but I'm going to need 2 volunteers. I want one to take this camera and go outside and take a picture of the wind. I want somebody to take this one and stay in here and take a picture of the oxygen that we're breathing. I want to see it. In other words, we're trying to get the message across to them that there's so much we do not see.
Right.
We do not see the people in spirit. That is a kingdom that is intermeshed with our physical world,
Right.
but not visible to our eyes. Spirit people see spirit people. Just
Right.
like you and I are looking at each other and we see it, and it registers in our mind. But they're listening. There's a group of them in this studio right now. If one of them would materialize in front of one of these cameras, I bet you anything there would be 9,700 people out there that faints or take their TV and throw it out the window.
Sure.
But they can do
Sure.
that. If they want to materialize in front of this
Right.
camera, they can do it.
You brought up a point there, too. With respect to this movie, I'm guessing, and I'm wondering about your opinion, if rather than unifying people, as perhaps Mr. Gibson is trying to do, he's going to polarize people, because you're going to have people who are so offended by the gore and the horrors that were committed by humans to this very special human, or you're going to have people that are going to become so much more devout and fanatical about their religion that it's scary. It's actually, I don't think it's going to help anybody.
Well, a few years back, when I was trying to find out who that was talking to me, and he finally told me, we'll show you,
Yeah.
and then the pictures came through.
Right.
It was during that time, and he said that he's never had a moment of peace since he went through that horrible death, because of all the people all over the world calling out his name every minute, every second of every day. Stop and think of that.
Yeah.
Stop and think of that.
Right.
Being in the other dimension, and you're hearing this continually all the time.
That's
To me, he's
unbelievable.
that's like going through hell, if
Right.
there is such a place. I don't
Right.
think that there is no such place.
I could imagine. Sid, you have something you want to share with us?
Yeah, I would like to talk about a book, or part of a book that I've read. I haven't had a chance to read too much of it, but I've started it. The name of the book is The Bible Fraud, and it's written by Tony Bushby. And the control room has a picture of, here's a picture of the book right now. And if you could zoom in into the quote that's on the cover of the book, it's quite interesting. It says, the quote says, "How well we know what a profitable superstition this fable of Christ has been for us." Fable. And this quote is from Pope Leo X, Pope of the Catholic Church. He lived from 1513 to 1521. He's the one that's calling the story of Christ a fable. What the point? This particular book has a very different interpretation of the Bible. The Tony Bushby was a Bible researcher similar to myself, and has read many different versions of the Bible. I'm not going to get into his main thesis because I haven't read the whole book and I haven't understood all of it. But what I want to bring out at this point is that much of the story about Jesus, his birth, his death, and everything else, it can be found in other religions. There were 16 crucified saviors that supposedly came to the world. Mithra was one of them.
Right. Okay.
Mithra's birthday was December
talked about
25th.
that too.
Right.
Okay.
He also supposedly died on a cross to sacrifice for the people's sins.
Pythagoras was another.
Pythagoras was another. Okay. Krishna was another one.
Okay.
In this book, I started reading this book. They say there's never any coincidences.
Right.
I started reading about this, and it had to do with the Talmud. And if people will just bear with me for a moment, I would like to read this paragraph.
Okay.
It says that Pope Alexander VI, and he was pope between 1492 and 1503, ordered all copies of the Talmud destroyed. Now, the Talmud is a Jewish book. It's not the Bible. It's a book of writings that were written afterwards. And the Council of the Inquisition inquired as many Jewish writings as possible to burn with the Spanish Grand Inquisitor Thomas de Tocma, responsible for the elimination of 6,000 volumes in Salamanca. So they burned 6,000 volumes of the Talmud in this one town. In 1550, Cardinal Cardafa and the Inquisitor General procured a bull from the Pope, repelling all previous permissions for priests to read the Talmud. They weren't allowed to read it, which he said contained hostile stories about Jesus Christ. There's more about all the different burnings and how many different Talmuds was burned. Over 12,000 of them were burnt around 1100. Why were Christians so much interested in burning the Talmud? When I read this, I was very confused by it. And lo and behold, a couple of weeks, I got my answer. My mother attends classes with some Hasidic Jews on a very regular basis. And one day, they got to talk about Jesus,
Okay.
the Hasidic rabbis. And they said there's a Talmud that has never been translated into English, which talks about the death of Jesus. And the fact that it was the Jews who killed Jesus, but they hung him with a rope on a tree.
Hold on. Hold the phone. All right.
Okay?
Okay.
So he was hung on a tree. He wasn't crucified on the cross. He was hung on a tree. And when I heard this, I said, well, that's a good reason why they were trying to burn all the evidence, why they would go through, specifically not looking for the Jewish Bibles, but looking for their Talmuds. They wanted to burn the evidence that this didn't happen this way. And it also explains why Pope Leo called this a fable, because he is talking about the fact that they threw all this crucified Savior story onto Jesus, okay, and that perhaps he didn't die on the cross as Mel Gibson portrayed, and he didn't die for people's sins as the church was trying to tell you. And if that theory goes up in smoke, then why go to a church?
Could we have that quote on the screen again? Just the quote of that book, please. How well we know what a profitable superstition, prophet, this fable of Christ has been for us. This is a pope.
This is a pope talking about how much money they're making off this story.
Thank you. That's unbelievable. Well, no, it's believable, but it's you don't hear that too often,
Right.
do you?
So obviously, as we said, Mel Gibson's movie is correct according to the Gospels, but who wrote the Gospels and why?
Yeah.
You know, and how much of this was doctored?
Right.
Just as we were saying, the Jews were very supportive of Jesus when he went in. Why did they turn hostile to him? Well, mainly because whoever edited the Bible decided that they wanted to make the Jews the scapegoat for this whole thing, when perhaps the whole storyline never occurred.
Carl, do you think Jesus was hung, not crucified?
He was hung on a tree.
He was.
Yeah, he's hung on a tree. But then somebody
boy.
else was impersonating him, and they put him on a cross and went through the whole thing. And it became a pageant in that part of the world for a long time, and it lasted a long time in Pompeii. And while it was in motion, while the pageant was in motion and the amphitheater was full of people watching this, that's when Vesuvius blew its top, and so many people lost their life in the year 79.
Okay, so that notion of a pageant or a show for the purposes of entertainment is still continuing today.
The passion stories, these passion stories, these reenactments of Jesus' crucifixion have happened all throughout the Middle Ages, and there was always a Jewish pogrom afterwards.
Wow. That's heavy. That's very heavy. People are not going to accept that. They're going to have a hard time with that.
And when Carl was talking about the duplicate, the second Jesus who was put on the cross,
Right.
that's what the Bible fraud talks about. It talks about that there were two people involved.
A good reference, folks, if you want to learn more. Very interesting. Wow. I have to think about that. That's a tough one. So the whole cross thing was entirely useless. A hanging is a hanging is a hanging, right?
Right.
We went when we were doing the research in Turkey, dealing with the crossovers.
Yeah.
We found a city they only discovered back here in the 50s. It's called the White City because it's all white marble. Gorgeous place, so advanced. But it had been covered up over the edges, so it must be thousands and thousands of years old. Because up to that time that they discovered it, when they were drilling, they thought that this was a mountain. And all the time it was a city covered up.
You're talking about Ephesus.
Yes.
Yes.
And we went to the amphitheater there, which was a great, huge place. And these people were so brilliant in those days that we went way up at the top, way up here, and there was two people down there on where the stage was talking. We could hear them as clear as if it was being amplified with...
Really?
Oh.
Yes.
Isn't that something?
Yeah. It
Amazing.
They knew exactly how the science of acoustics. It was amazing.
Amazing.
You know, it's interesting because one of Mel Gibson's quotes here is, people are asking questions about things that have been buried a long time. I think whether he realizes it or not, even though he's reigning on the side of the story or the fabrication of this over time, it's actually going to inspire the opposite, I think, for people really to start thinking about this.
I have the same
What do
feeling.
you think?
I have the same feeling. I think that a lot of the truth is going to come out. If you have books like the Da Vinci Code coming out and starting to explain things, I think this is just going to add energy to the truth coming out.
You know, I also read in an interview about the young man, James, I'm not even sure if I'll pronounce his last name correctly, so excuse me, Caviezel, I think that's his last name, who portrayed Jesus in this movie. He'd had some kind of interesting experiences, and of course, I'm always wondering if there's spiritual intervention here or there. And what I'm going to do is read what his experience was. One of the soldiers, he said, actually missed him and hit his back when they were whipping him while he was carrying the cross. And he has a very long scar to show for it. And when he was also shooting the Sermon on the Mount. This is a quote. About 4 seconds before it happened, it was quiet. And then it was like someone slapped my ears. I had 7 or 8 seconds of like a pink fuzzy color, and people started screaming. They said I had fire on the left side of my head and light around my body. Well, you know what? When I read that, that says, ask Carl.
That's the auric field. You see, that light, it did this, comes from the soul. I see the light around you. I see it around, I see it around the camera person over there. And you can't see that light as a rule because, you see, we only use a small amount of the brain. And the brain is simply shut down because of the viruses that is in the system.
But Carl, why do you suppose that happened to this young man? He's an actor.
He's an actor, but it's the people in the spirit world that did that, hoping that that will help open the minds of the people that watch it. You understand?
Do you think it would have, though?
Yes, some it will. Some it will. If they're ready, yes.
Let me read something to you
Thank
from the
you.
Bible. It's in the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 2. And it says, and when the day of Pentecost had come, they were all together in one place. This is after Jesus died. And suddenly there came from heaven a noise like a violent rushing wind, and infilled the whole house where they were sitting. And there appeared to them tongues as of fire, distributing themselves, and they were rested on each one of them. And they were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak with other tongues as the Spirit was giving them utterances. Now, they always picture this as a flame sitting on top of their head. Okay? So my question to you, Carl, is this similar to what happened to this actor?
Yes.
Would the person have seemed like a flame on the top of the head? And,
Yes.
and if this is, what does it signify?
One time I was at a seance, this was quite a while ago, and there was about, I think 24, 25 people around this huge table, and this was in a mansion somewhere west of Hartford, somewhere way up on the hill. And it was such a powerful seance that night. I just knew that night something was going to happen. And these flames, it was as if they came out of a candle, so the flames might have been this high, and they were racing all over the table like this. And they go over and they stop right in front of a person. Scared the daylights out of some of these
Oh,
people.
I'm sure it did.
But I tried to get them to understand what may happen. I said, I don't know. But I said, I feel the presence of some very highly elevated spirit people with us, and there's no telling what they may do to prove to you people that they are there and they're here with us tonight. And so all of a sudden these flames, and then they all went out at one time.
So that would be like the physical manifestation of energy,
Yeah.
right? Spirit energy?
So do you think the spirit people caused this to happen because they were reenacting what happened around Jesus? To get people to kind of understand that this is a psychic event that was happening?
Thank
Yes, they want people to know it. They do all kinds of things to get us to understand that they are here, not out there somewhere.
I think with this interview, what the angle was that because Jesus was revered as such an untouchable being, that portraying him was almost like a sin, and thus you'd be struck by lightning for even attempting this. So that's the spin that I get, that was interpreted as.
Well, that's what happened when I was 4 months old. When I was 4 months old and I was nursing on the breast, I only found this out after my mother died because she never would talk to me about it.
Really?
And that's when the lightning hit this tree, right, from about 8 feet from the porch. And then a bolt of fire came from the tree and hit her right there. And she was rocking me and I was nursing, and evidently I flung right out of her arms and into my sister's arms, which was on the swing right
Really?
there. And
Very interesting.
when the doctor came, they went and got the doctor. When he came, he said that my father would have to keep doing what he was doing. He was putting cold towels on her to get her pulse up beating. And he said that he argued with my sister. My sister said, well, the baby here got hit by that bolt of lightning too. He says, well, the baby's dead. He said, no, this is not, the baby's not dead. This is, the baby's in my arms right here. She said that there was no one bit of noise, no crying, no nothing from the baby.
Really?
None at all.
That was you.
And it was after that they found out that I have this thing right here. And many times that's been picked up on x-rays. I won't let anybody operate on that.
Really?
I don't know what it is.
You've
It
never
has
talked
a
about that
metallic
before.
substance, though.
Really?
I don't know what it is. But spirit will do anything, anything. When Jesus walked on the water, he could do that. He levitated.
Well, one of the questions that I have is, will the two of you view this movie?
I'm not going to go see it
Why not?
because I've seen him suffer enough in my own mind. I don't want to go see that.
Okay. Sid?
Besides, they told me that Gibson there did the movie and was going to help the Vatican Bank out because they're close to bankruptcy, paying for all these sex things.
Really?
Going to help them out. He took in more than 50 million yesterday.
Wasn't he against Vatican II and,
Yes.
and all of that?
Yes, he's very
Yes,
much
he
against
was.
that.
And he was very, very homophobic. Is that the right word?
That's the right word.
He was very much against being gay people.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah. But he's going to help the Pope with the money from that thing.
That's very interesting. Sidney?
No, I really have no desire to see it because I'm not much into blood and gore. I didn't see. They talk about the movie Saving Private Ryan. I didn't see that movie either because of that.
Right.
The thing that really horrified me the other day was the fact that I went into a local supermarket and saw that Mel Gibson has a book out that goes along with the movie.
Right.
And that to me really showed that there's a very strong commercial aspect to this whole project.
Very commercial.
And made me wonder about all the hype that's been going on about it and how it might have been manufactured just to raise a lot of money so that he can make a lot of money.
Well, he has 7 children to support.
No, that's true.
Yeah. Usually the book starts and then the movie comes after the book.
Mm-hmm.
So that's very interesting.
Right.
Because the book has some research, some hard facts, some scientific
the book's
knowledge.
been out, hasn't it?
Yeah, right. That's true. Sidney just held up the Bible if you didn't quite see that.
Right.
Yes, this is true. Well, we have a few minutes left in this show, and I did ask if you would care to see the movie or not, so I guess that kind of counts as final thoughts. But was there anything else you wanted to add?
Well, I'd like to tell the people, the viewers of this program, that we're here to get them to think for themselves. We're here to make known the unknown. And the prayer that I would suggest, I call them affirmations. That word prayer has been worn out as far as I'm concerned. And if you go into a quiet place and you sit and face north, I know you'll all want to know why. Well, there's a magnetic pull from that direction. If you don't believe me, take a compass and hold it in your hand and you'll see it facing north. You face that way too. And then you close your eyes and you visualize your soul right here under the breastbone. And the soul is producing a light that you will not see, but the light is like a cocoon that encases your whole body. That's the Lord of your being. So if you say, Lord God of my being, unto the Father within, come forward this moment, this hour, and bring forth the Christ that is within me, and release the enzymes from my brain into my bloodstream, that my body, your temple, be healed. So be it. And the more you say that, the more you're going to wake this up, because this is asleep. And you ask your physician how much of the human brain is used today, and if he's up to snuff with his knowledge, he'll tell you about 10%. So what's the rest of it doing there?
Right.
Because
Place
there's a
to put your hair.
gland, there's a gland in everybody's body, right here, a gland, that was put there in the beginning of all beginnings to produce protein for the body. And there's a little part of the brain here that acts as a switch to keep this operating. But because this part of the brain is not working, the gland does not produce protein. It produces instead acid. And this is why we are only here for a short while and we die. If this was working as it should work, we would be like Methuselah in the Bible, who lived 969 years. The Bible says, and he died of an old age. He did not die. He went off by himself, speeded up the vibration of his body, and ascended, took his body with him. That's what Jesus did after he wound up in the world of spirit. He came back, went into the tomb, and went back into the body. speeded up the vibration, and it was the explosion of going from solid mass into light that caused the big boulder to move, to be blown away from the opening. And when the soldiers were asleep, all they saw was a brilliant, bright light inside of that cave. He had gone beyond, he'd gone into solid light. And the first thing he did is he wanted to find his mother, and he did. And he told her not to tell anybody, but just like so many other people, she paid attention. So she went to the upper room and told all the boys that he's back.
Thank you. That doesn't leave much time for Sidney, but Sid, is there anything quick you want to share?
No, that's okay.
Okay.
I'm all set.
You'll defer. That was enough
Right.
for many people,
He'll
I think.
probably open the door and kick me out because he's driving.
No, the only thing I wanted to mention, it's interesting, he said that you should face north to say the affirmation when all religions have you face east to say prayers.
Think about that one, folks.
They don't want you to look within.
Okay. We've got to wrap up, or I'm going to be in a lot of trouble here. I want to remind our viewers that they can use the information at the end of the show to request a copy of the book, My First Encounter with an Angel. And there's a phone number.